good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from today's session. And welcome to the Nigeria M365 community, where we'll discuss everything about Office 365, enterprise, mobility, plus security, and Windows 365. We are actually excited to have you join us today. So today's session, we are jumping into our introduction to Microsoft Teams Part 3. For the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at the Microsoft Teams application itself, how users can use the Microsoft Teams application. And for today, we want to start looking at the administration itself. What are the things that it Teams administration do to actually manage the Microsoft Teams itself? So I want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. So basically today, let me introduce myself. I'll be your anchor today. My name is Emmanuel Itoje. I'm a cloud operation and security engineer. An IT professional with experience in infrastructure, cloud services, and productivity applications with a focus on enabling business use technologies to optimize organization strategy. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, Microsoft 365 Enterprise Administrator, Teams Voice Engineer Expert, Identity and Access Administrator, and an Azure Solution Architect. And I'm glad to actually have everyone today. So our housekeeping room actually remains the same, just the session will be recorded and all recordings are actually available for viewing on our YouTube channel. And please ensure that your mic is actually on mute when you're not talking. And if you do have a question in the course of the discussion when our speaker is speaking, just pen down your questions down somewhere, or you can use the Q&A session to drop down the question, even the chat. And during the question and answer session, your questions will actually be attended to, basically. And we encourage everyone to actually subscribe to our YouTube channel so that as soon as we upload the videos, once your notification is turned on, you're able to receive your notifications. And if you do have any feedback about any of our sessions so far, please feel free to leave us a feedback and we'll actually appreciate it. So today I'm going to introduce our speaker to us today. Our speaker is actually a very special person that we have today in the house. So his name is actually Chidiebere. Chidi is a Microsoft certified trainer. He's also a Microsoft Teams specialist, and I know him to be a Microsoft 365 advocate. He's actually a specialist when it comes to the Microsoft Teams, and he's passionate about helping people to transition into tech by providing training, mentorship when it comes to the Microsoft Teams. One of the person, just like the way we had Afiz as an SME Microsoft Teams. Chidi is also a Microsoft Teams specialist as an SME in the community, and we're actually happy to have him today. Chidi, how are you doing today? How are you doing today?
Very fine. Very well. Thank you,
All
Emmanuel.
right. Before I actually hand over the session to you, I want to actually take your mind back. Some years back, we used to have the Sky for Business, the legacy portal. Do you miss the Sky for Business Admin Center? Do you miss it at all?
Honestly, no, I don't. I,
'Cause-
and the reason why I say I don't because I mean, you know, the Sky for Business was, it was a sort of a center or a platform that had its own issues, right? Because
yeah.
we had so much integration from the on premises and being the fact that the on-premises side of Sky for Business Online, had a little bit of hiccups, right? I will use the word when it comes to integration of Sky for Business. So phasing it out was like a good thing for us because we were able to focus mainly online, right? So we understand the architecture of online, but for you to also play around with Sky for Business, you needed to also understand the architecture as well. But then honestly, I would say I don't miss it.
Because I remember over 4 years ago when I was coming into the Microsoft 365 space, the support escalation engineer that came from Microsoft to actually train us then, Raj Kumar, I can still remember it very well. He had to struggle whenever he was teaching us Sky for Business, the admin center. But by the time he jumped into Microsoft Teams, it was very easy for him to actually flow to explain the whole team settings, teams meeting settings and all that. It was flowing very well. So I knew that the Sky for
Yeah,
Business was actually something that they didn't even like themselves because it was actually giving them a lot of problem as even being
yeah,
a support escalation engineer.
yeah. It was actually because I mean, when it comes to Microsoft Teams, right? I mean, it is straightforward. Straightforward in the sense that you have Microsoft Teams. receiving its identity from Azure AD, right? But in the terms of Sky for Business, right now, you begin to you would want to understand the architecture of Sky for Business, where you have the edge server, you have the pool server, you have about three servers that you need to understand before you understand the architecture of Sky for Business. But for Microsoft Teams, it's just basically online, so you don't need to set up any server to understand. You don't need to set up any firewalls to understand, the architecture and its integration with your identity. But on the other hand, because of that headache of server and pool of server and edges of server for Sky for Business, it was something that most Sky for Business and Teams administrators found difficult, because again, it is not something that you will be able to install or have in your own architecture yourself, right? So it became a problem. But for Teams, I mean, you could get a license, for 30 days, do your practice, and then build your architecture, and then you're out of there, right? But for the Sky for Business, it took a whole lot for you to even have that architecture set up before you talk about its administration.
Exactly, exactly. So the last thing I will want to discuss before I hand over the section to you. So from the Teams Admin Center perspective, we have team settings, teams policies, teams templates, template policies, a lot of things looking so much alike. At some point that was actually confusing me during that my training then, but I had to go back
Okay.
and sit down to understand each of this parts. What is teams policy? What is teams template? What is template policy? So I'm hoping that the audience, people joining us today, will not have the same confusion I had then, because I know we have the best guy on that is ready to give us the best in the teams. So you have the session, Chidi.
All
Thank
right.
you
Thank
very
you.
much. Yeah,
Thank you so much. All right.
yeah.
Before we jump into this session, just to summarize and answer your question, right? When it comes to teams, one thing should, you know, come to your mind, and that is Teams has to do with policy assignment, right? And then when you understand your policy assignment and how your policy assignment works, then you understand Microsoft Teams, right? So not to get confused, definitely I will take it one after the other, and then we are able to understand some of these policies. But just in case I miss out or I pronounce anything you don't understand, note it down, jot it down, use your raise hand feature, and in our question and answer session, we're able to tackle that and then throw more light on that as well.
All right, I'm actually ready. I think the people are ready too. Let's do
Okay.
it. Let's do it.
All right. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. So once again, my name is Ihejirika Chidiebere. You can call me Chidi. It's fine with me. So we don't have to pronounce the long name. Yeah. So I'll dive right into it, and then I'll share my screen so we can get started. All right. So let me know when you can see my screen, please.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Awesome. Okay. All right, so here today we are already going to dive into Microsoft Teams. Like Emmanuel already said, right? Last week and last 2 weeks, one of my colleagues, Afiz Aziz, has spoken about Teams client, which we refer to as Teams client or Teams desktop client, and then we have different types of client, right? But he focused mainly on the Teams desktop client. So today we are going to dive into
Oh, Chidi, I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you check your mic? Hi, Chidi.
Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you now. We lost you for some
Awesome.
minutes there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, sorry about that. Yes, I think I fell off for some few seconds. Okay. All right. So, like I already said, my colleague Afiz, focused mainly on the Teams client. So today we are going to be focusing on the Teams Admin Center. Try to understand some of the features that you have there, and then we'll take it one after the other. So, without wasting any time, we'll jump right into it. Now, if you can see my screen, right, you will see that the first, what you see there is the Teams Admin Center. And in the Teams Admin Center, we'll have various features that you have under the Teams Admin Center. The first thing we have is the Teams, we'll have the users, we'll have the Teams devices, we'll have the Teams app, meetings, messaging, voice, location, enhanced encryption, policy packages, planning, analytics and report, and notification alert, right? Now, each of these features that you have has its own, has its own expanded submenus that helps you to manage Microsoft Teams. But
Hi,
before we even
Chidi.
go that, yeah,
Sorry, before you go in, sorry, before we actually go into the features, you can just overview like the overview of the teams, who can actually access the teams itself, how is it accessed, how did it
exactly,
get to this point? You can show us everything like that.
exactly. So, right, so here, of course, like Emmanuel already mentioned, we have permissions, right? That you would need to have before you can access Microsoft Teams Admin Center. The first thing first is here I'm logged into this user, right? As this is the user I'm logged into, and I have to log into Microsoft Office.com, right, to be able to get to this part. Now, when you log into this part, if depending on the role assigned to you, you will get this icon called Admin Center. And then one of the roles that you would need to have is, for example, global administrator. If you're a global administrator, once you log into your office.com, you are going to have this admin center. But Microsoft Teams specifically has different roles that that can be assigned to a user depending on a particular feature or what you want them to administer in Microsoft Teams, right? Now, some of those roles will determine what you're going to see the moment you sign into your Microsoft Teams Admin Center, right? Now, the roles I have listed here, right? So if you come over here to roles and administration, if you type Microsoft, type Teams, right? This gives you the list of all the Microsoft Teams roles and permissions that you have and then can be assigned to users. One of them is Teams Administrator. One of them is Teams Communication Administrator. One of the other one is Teams Communication Support Engineer. This other one is Teams Communication Support Specialist, and then Teams Device Administrator. Now, when you assign any of this administrative role to users, this will determine what they can and what they cannot see, and then what they can also administer when it comes to Microsoft Teams. When you are start, for example, we talk about Teams administrator. The Teams administrator is like the global administrator for Microsoft Teams. Just like we have the global administrator in Office 365 who can manage all features or policies, administer every function in Microsoft 365. The same way we have the Teams administrator who can manage everything that has to do with Microsoft Teams, which means that the user is able to see all features like we have seen here, right? The teams, the users, the devices, the meeting policies, and the rest of it. So the user is able to see those features and is able to manage those features, right? And the next one we have the Teams Communication Administrator. Now, when you assign this particular role to a user, they have limitations to what they can see. Now, by the word communications, right, it means that communications in Teams now refers to meetings, messagings, and calls, right? So it means that this user is able to manage each of these workloads, right? When you talk about meetings, they're able to, create policies in meetings. They're able to assign the policies in meetings. They're able to also create policies in live event. They're able to create policies in messaging policies, and then assign these policies to either a single user or to a group of users. Right now, the other one talk about the Teams communication support engineer. Now, this Teams communication support engineer is almost the same thing with this other one. So if you look at here, we have Teams communication support engineer and we have Teams communication support specialist. Now, these two does the same thing, right? But the difference here is that the Teams communication support engineer is able to use some advanced tools, right, to troubleshoot issues that has to do with communications in Microsoft Teams. Now, like we already defined before, communication in Microsoft Teams refers to calls, meetings, live events, messagings, as you have it in Microsoft Teams, right? So if you are assigning a Teams communication support engineer to a user, it means that the expectation is that this user should be able to use some advanced tools that Microsoft has provided, or some advanced third-party tools to troubleshoot issues that has to do with calls, like issues that have to do with meetings, issues that has to do with live event, and issues that has to do with chats, right? Meanwhile, the other one, which is Teams Communication Support Specialist, does the same thing, but in this case has limited tools that he or she can use. So when I assign the Teams communication support specialist to a user, the expectation here is that the user should be able to troubleshoot calls, meetings, and live event, but cannot use some advanced tools like the third-party tools I've mentioned. An example of them would be a Power BI, right? There's an API in Power BI that allows you to, you know, get the quality dashboard of Microsoft Teams for any organization. We're able to have a deep dive to some of the calls that has been made, the failure of the calls, what caused the failure, is it from the network side of things or from the device side of things, right? Now, this particular API, the Teams communications support specialist cannot use, but the Teams communication support engineer can use that to troubleshoot and then of course try to resolve issues that are related to communications, right? Now, the last one here is Teams Device Administrator. Now, the Teams Device Administrator refers to a user who is able to administer anything that has to do with devices. Now, as we would see at the course of in the course of the training, there are devices that are particular or certified as Microsoft Teams devices, right? Now, these devices are what organizations can use to configure for their meetings, their messaging, or conference calls, or um, depending on where they want to deploy such phones, right? Now we'll see those type of devices in the course of our training. And then when you assign a Teams device administrator to a user, the user is able to use the Teams administration admin to administer those phones, deploy those phones, assign policy to those phones, assign account users to those phones, or resources as we may call it in Microsoft Teams, assign resources to those phones and then deploy those phones as you would have it. So there goes the different type of permissions and then the roles that you can have before you can access the Teams admin center, right? So I hope that gives us an insight to how a user can administer Microsoft Teams. So the user I'm signing here by default is signing as a global administrator, right? And then when I'm signing to this user, as we saw earlier, I clicked on this admin, then that took me here. Now under the admin sentence, you will see different admin sentence based on the role that is assigned to this user. And because this user has a global administrative role, I can click on the Teams here, and then that takes me to the Teams admin center. And then the first thing you're going to see once that launches is a dashboard of Microsoft Teams. And again, remember I said this would display according to the permission or the roles that's been assigned to you as a user, right? Okay. I don't know if anyone has any questions so far. All right, we'll leave the questions, for the Q&A session. Okay, so like I said, the first thing you're going to see is the dashboard of your Teams Admin Center. It gives you an overview of what has been configured, and if you have also enabled Microsoft Teams for your environment, you would see that icon, showing here. This is just an overview that you're going to see. Activities of users, activity logs, and then you can also search for users as well. But going into each of the features that we have, the first thing that we have here is Teams. Now, sometimes people, when you mention Microsoft Teams or when you mention Teams, people get confused, right? Because when you say Teams, they think that you are talking about the application, right? Or when you talk about Teams, they think that, oh, maybe you're talking about the Teams application itself, right? But sometimes I try to be explicit in the sense that when I'm referring to the Teams application, I call it the Teams desktop client. But now we are talking about Teams, and the Teams in this case is what is called the Teams group. So I'm going to use that word so that we don't confuse the Teams I'm mentioning here. Now we are going to be talking about the next thing here is the Teams group. Now the Teams group is a type of feature that allows users to collaborate and communicate as a team, right? Now, in creating a Teams group, right? It allows you to bring a number of users, both internal and external users, to be able to communicate as a team. It helps them to share files. It helps them to collaborate in the team. It helps them to, align to some certain projects that is ongoing within that particular organization, right? Now, as we may have seen in previous classes where we were shown the Microsoft Teams client, right? And then we would have been shown that you are able to create a Teams group from the Teams client. The same way again, you are able to create a Teams group from the admin center, right? Now, here are the list of the groups that has been created. And when you are creating one, all you need to do is, once you go over to the manage team, click on add, gives the option to put the name of that particular team you're to create, and then also put the description of that particular team, and again, most importantly, the owner of the team. And in some cases, of course, if you are logged into the admin center as an admin person, right, by default, creating a team from an admin center selects you as the default owner of that particular team you're about to create. But if you're going to assign that team's owner to another user, then it's good to remove your name and then search for the user you want to assign the ownership of that group. Now, again, on the admin center, you have just two types of group that you can create when it comes to Microsoft Teams, right? You have the private team and then the public team. Now, the private team, is it's private by the word, right? It restricts users from the organization from searching and joining a particular team. So by the word private, the team that you're going to create or the group that you're going to create out of this particular team remains unsearchable, right? Which means that users in your organization cannot search for those names and then join that particular team, and then by your global address list, those particular groups are hidden. But when you choose the public one, it becomes visible for users to search and join. In some cases, when they sign into Microsoft Teams client, those groups may even pop up as a suggestion or as a suggested group, and then they're able to join those groups. And by so doing, those kind of groups are available or on your global address list, and then you are able to join them. So we're just going to quickly create one. So we're going to call this one uh, M365 Teams. Okay, you can decide to give it a description. The description is not mandatory, so you can decide to give it a description, or you can decide to also leave the description as well. Now here you can search the person you want to assign the ownership of that team to, right? So here I can search for a name, and when you search for name, in some cases, Microsoft Teams allows you to search with the three first letter of the person's name, and then it does the search, and then it comes up with the name. You can select the name and then apply. Now, bear in mind that there are various ways that you can create a team, right? I'm very sure that my colleague Afiz would have shown us how we are able to create a team when creating a team from the Teams client, right? From the Teams client. And then from the Teams client, you have various options more than what you have on the Teams admin center, right? And apart from also creating like I already mentioned, I call this Teams group, which means that the moment you create a team here, by default, it creates an Office 365 group for you in all the Microsoft 365 associated groups. In your Azure AD, you are going to see that group available. In your SharePoint Admin Center, you're going to see that group available. All in all workloads of Office 365 that has an association with Microsoft 365 group, you're going to have that group visible in those areas the moment you create this group or this team from here, right? Now, when you also create this group, in Microsoft Teams, it also creates what is called a channel for you. Now, the channel that you have in Microsoft Teams is what enables you for communication in Teams, right? Now, the moment you create that particular Teams group, it gives you a default channel called general channel. The general channel is where the communications, where the messaging, where the file sharing takes place in the Microsoft Teams client, right? But then you are also able to create an additional channels, which could be dependent on what you want. But by default, the moment you create that particular Teams group, it creates a default general channel for you. And that is where all the conversations, all the communications, file sharing takes place, right? Now you can see how I navigated here. So by default, when you create that team, it comes under the manage team. These are the previous one I've created before now. So you can see we've created one earlier, which was Microsoft 365 Teams, and you can see that the privacy we chose was public, right? And you all can also see we didn't give it any description, and the group, it's also going to create a group ID for you, right? So for any reason, if you are creating a group or you're creating a Microsoft Teams group, right, and then the group does not have a group ID, then there might be some issues along the line when you're using that particular group for communication, right? So you should always ensure that when you create such group, it has a group ID provision in your admin center. Okay, so navigating to that, you click on it, you see members. Now you see the owner of that particular team. We were not able to add members of that particular team because creating a Microsoft Teams group from admin center only gives you the option to create or add the owner of that particular team. So additionally, you can come here, add more owners, right? And then you can also add members of that particular group or people that you want them to be members of that particular group. You can add internal members in your organization. You can also add external members who are seen as guests in Microsoft Teams. Then the most important thing to note here is that when you create a Microsoft Teams group, right, bear in mind that a Teams group must always have an owner, right? A Teams group must always have an owner. This is because there has been situations where people create a group, create a team, and they only have one owner in a particular group. And I always advise administrators, when you're creating a team, ensure that you have more than one owner on that particular team. Now, the reason is this. Now, in an organization, we may have someone who is an owner of a particular team resign, right? And then the administrator or the global administrator would not, for any reason, know that he or she belonged to, uh, 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 a particular, or is an owner of a particular teams group, except for some administrators that will be proactive to check, right? But some may not be able to check, and then the next thing they do is they remove a license from that user. And the moment you remove a license from that user, and then the user was the only owner of a particular teams group, what is going to happen is that that teams group, when the user's license is removed, and then the user becomes an unlicensed user, and then the user is now inactive from Office 365, also thereby becoming inactive from Microsoft Teams. Now that team no longer has an owner, and by the time an issue occurs, now the funny thing is you may not notice the issue at the moment when the user is being removed or when the license is removed. When an issue will occur is at the point when you want to either configure some settings for that particular team, or you want to assign an owner to that particular team. It becomes a difficult thing because if there is no original owner to that particular team, it becomes a difficult thing to assign another owner to that particular group, the teams group. So it's always advisable that when you're creating a team, ensure that you have at least more than one owner in that particular team. Okay, so the next thing we look at here is the channels of that party for a team. So like we already mentioned, the channels is where you have communications, share files, post your comment in in a Teams group, right? So it becomes available for you by default, but you can also create an additional channels, right? Which means that if I have a general channel here, and I can also create an additional channel by clicking on add, and I have the three types of channel that I can create. When I click on add, I have a private channel, I have a public channel, which can be called standard, and I also have a shared channel. Now, the difference between this type of channel is that, like we already mentioned, by the word private. Now, if I create a private channel, there's one thing that we need to bear in mind. Now, if I add owners or add members to this particular team, all the members of this particular team we will be able to share chat, will be able to communicate, and then share files in this general channel. because this general channel we created was a public general channel. So by default, it takes in all the members of that channel, right? But the moment I create another channel here, and then the channel is going to be a private channel. Now, because this is private, it is no longer public for all the users who are members of the original Teams group. I'm going to take that again. If I create a private channel, right, the original members of the group or the Teams group would not by default be members of that private channel, which means that I would need to add them individually because of the privacy of that channel, right? But if I create a standard channel under the same team, by default, the members of that team or the members of the original team will still be members of the standard channel by default. And that is why this is called standard. So the standard or the public becomes a default, because a default channel where members are added automatically when you're creating it under an original team. But the moment you select a private, you would need to add or select the members you need to be part of the private channel before they can have access to that private channel. And that's the difference between the private channel and the standard or public channel. Then the next one here is called shared channel. Now, the shared channel is a type of channel that Microsoft, brought out, recently. What that does is it helps users outside your organization to communicate. Now, what what we saw before the shared channel came in was a situation where if I am in an organization A and I have a user who is in an organization B and we need to collaborate, we need to communicate in a Teams channel. Now, remember again, when it comes to collaboration, there's what we call external collaboration and there's what is called guest collaboration. We're still going to come into that and then we'll throw more light on that, right? But what we had before the share channel came in was a situation whereby if I need to collaborate with someone who is in a different organization to my own organization, I would need to add them to a public channel, which is a standard channel. And by the time I add them, they accept that invitation. Now, for them to be able to communicate or collaborate with me in that standard channel, they would need to switch from their own organization to my own organization as a guest user, right? And by the time they make that switch, right, they become unavailable on their own tenant, on their own original tenant. Let's say this user is in tenant A or organization A, and I am in organization B. When I send that invite and the user accepts that invite, and then they try to collaborate with me, they would have to make a switch from their own tenant A, organization A, to tenant B. And the moment they make that switch, they become offline in their own original tenant. Thereby, if for any reason any user in their own organization is trying to reach them directly for a call or chat, they will not receive that particular message, right? Now, that came to Microsoft as a thought, and that was where they brought about the shared channel. Now, what the share channel does for you is you are able to create a channel, right, that gives you access to the same guest collaboration, the same guest identity or guest collaboration, and then you would not need to switch from your own organization to the other users organization. And for that to happen, there are things that you need to configure between your organization and then the other organization. And then you will also need to have what we call federation, right? A trust relationship. So if I have a trust relationship with you, organization A has a trust relationship with organization B, and in that case, we are able to collaborate and then create what is called a federation between our two tenants, and then we are able to create that shared channel where we are able to collaborate or communicate in Microsoft Teams. Okay. All right, so that's that. That's that about the Microsoft Teams, and then the next thing we have here is also settings, right? The various settings that you have that you can configure as an admin. So one of them here is the public the public privacy, right? Here you can edit the permissions, or you can change the privacy of that team. Remember, before we created it to be public, we can change it to private. But one thing to note here is even though we can change from public to private, we cannot change from private to public. So that is very important to note. Now, other things that we can also do on the settings side is to manage permissions. You can see there are different type of permissions you can manage here. Edit message, delete message. Teams owner can delete sent messages, right? So when you defined these settings on the admin level, right, that is also going to affect the owners of that particular team, right? There are other permissions or settings that you would also change, but then there are certain levels of permission that are given to the owner of that particular team to determine if he or she wants users or members of that particular team to either use that feature or not. Right now, you also have here guests in the team. So we already mentioned about guests and how you are able to add a guest to your team. Right, we have users in a different organization and you want to collaborate with them in your own organization. So you can also determine what they can do in your team, right? Where it says guests can add or edit channels, guests can delete channels. So by default, these are turned off because I mean, ordinarily you wouldn't want to have a guest in your own organization be able to delete or edit channels that you have created in your organization. So these are turned off by default, except in any organization that wants to turn that on. Now, other fun parts that we have here is what you can also use to moderate your Microsoft Teams, and these are basically the features that the Teams administrator can set when it comes to Microsoft Teams, right? And there are other features or settings that the owner of the team, Microsoft has left solely for the owner of the team to be able to handle when it comes to management of the team's channels. Okay, right. So that's about the team and creation of team and then managing of team and then things that you can see from the admin perspective when it comes to Teams creation. Then the next thing we want to talk about is the team settings, right? Now the team settings here gives you idea as to what you want to also determine, you want to the features you want to display in Microsoft Teams, and then also how you want the owners of the particular team that creates a team, the features that you want them to be available in that Microsoft particular in that particular team. One of them here is the notification and feed, right? Now, notification and feed is a general feature, right? So if I come over here under my Microsoft Teams client, the web part, you look at this particular first feature here called activity and feeds, right? Now, this activity and feeds is enabled by this feature. So if I turn off this feature, it means that I am disabling this activity and feeds for everybody in my organization. So not just for for a Teams user or a particular user. So once I turn that off, I'm turning this off for every member of my organization, right? So this is what handles this. Now here we have tagging. Now, when it comes to tagging, right, this has to do with when you are using Microsoft Teams for collaboration. You want to add mention people, you want to manage your teams and channels using a tag, right? Now here you can determine how you want those tags to be used, and you can also determine who can manage those particular tags. For here, it's set as default. You can also allow it for teams owners to be able to determine who should be able to use tags within those teams. You can also leave it at teams owners and members. So it's all dependent on what you want to allow and how you want to allow them. So here by default, it's set to Microsoft default, which means that both members and owners are able to use tags in that Microsoft Teams client, right? Okay, you can also use the tags on your Shift applications, right? So a Shift application is an app on Microsoft Teams, like a third-party app, but of course, it's also a Microsoft app which you can use to achieve some features in Microsoft Teams, right? So you can also use tags in those applications as well. All right, the next one we have here is the email integration. Email integration basically speaks to the email system that you have in your channels. For example, if you create, remember that we did create a Teams here, right? And then we called it Microsoft 365, right? And then other ones that we have here. So I'm going to use one of them as an example. You come over here and then you have team. if you have this one here, then under here you have the general channel. And under the general channel, you are able to get an email address of the general channel, which means that someone outside or in your organization can send an email to this email, and then it will drop right into this channel, right? And everybody in this, this team will be able to receive them. But if you do not want to enable that feature, you can disable it by turning off this email integration here. So one of the things you want to check if, for example, users are not getting emails on the general channel is to check if this email integration is turned off, right? So the moment this email integration is turned off, by default, you will not be able to receive those email, or you will not be able to fetch those channel emails from your Teams client, right? And then other ones we have here is the file integration as well. Of course, by default, we already know that Microsoft Teams uses OneDrive for its one-on-one communication and chats, right? But Microsoft again allows you to do an integration of other cloud storages like Citrix files, Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, right? So what this does is you are able to bring in these cloud storages if you have license for them, or if you signed up for any of them, you're able to bring in any of these file storages into Microsoft Teams. An administrator can decide what cloud storage he or she wants to allow with your organization. So you can either turn this off if you do not want to allow users to integrate any of this cloud storage to your own platform, and then you can leave it on if you want them to integrate such again. Okay. So now this show organization tab for users. So this in the case whereby you have organizational hierarchy, right? You've configured managers in your organization, users under them, their subordinates and all of that. And then you want users to click on the organization tab, right? If you come over here, if I go to a user, for example, if I select this user, let me see if I have any user here that is within my organization. Right, so if you come over here to user and click on the organizational tab, so this loads for you if you've configured that hierarchy for your organization. So this also powers that. So if this is turned on, people are able to see that organizational tab and are able to click on it to to have that show up in your for them, right? So the next one here is devices. But these devices here basically speaks to Surface Hub, right? For an organization that is making use of Surface Hub, and you want to determine how people should be able to access meetings or attend meetings in those Surface Hubs. So here you can determine what kind of access they should have. Either you are leaving as no access, partial access, and full access. This is because Microsoft Surface Hub has a different integration to other devices when it comes to Microsoft Teams, right? So that is why it has its own separate features or how you want to allow access to those devices. Next we have search by name. Now, this search by name by default is usually turned off. It is turned on because now when you talk about let me just read what we have here. We have here scope directory search controls how users can find and communicate with other users in their organization. Now, this particular line of sentence always confuses people. It confuses people because this feature here acts as your GAL, that is your global address list, right? That you have in Microsoft 365. Now, when you turn this on, what it does is that it limits your scope search in Microsoft Teams, right? It limits your scope search in Microsoft Teams. So if, for example, I'm searching for users outside my organization and I have this turned on, right? It limits the search that you can do in Microsoft Teams. And in some organization where an administrator wants to limit how users are able to search people externally, right? Then you can always turn this on. But then it does not only limit how you can search people externally, it also limits how you can search for internal when you're trying to collaborate in Microsoft Teams. One of the example is if, for example, I create a team, right? I'm creating a team, and then I do not want to I do not want to start adding users individually to that particular team. I want to add them as a bulk users, either using a security group or using a distribution group, right? Now, if I turn this on, it's going to limit how the search of those particular groups. Because remember, when you create a group, right, the group becomes available in your global address list. And when this is turned on, right, it limits how you can search for those groups to add users as bulk users. Okay. Right. Now, the next thing we also want to talk here is role-based chat permissions. Now, the role-based chat permissions in most cases do not function. Administrators may not necessarily need it, right? Where this functions properly or where it can be used, or I've seen it used to its full potential is when you talk about Microsoft Teams in the educational sector, right? Now, when Microsoft Teams was released or became intensively used as at 2020, during the COVID period, right? Microsoft discovered something. They discovered that users or students were able to chat, search for users, initiate chat for when they were working remotely, attending class remotely. They were able to search for their own search their individual colleagues or their fellow students, and then they can initiate chat. They can even search for a teacher, initiate chat with a teacher without any form of permission or any form of monitoring, and then it could cause some sort of distraction in a class as well. So what Microsoft did was to initiate what is called role-based chat permissions. And what this permission does was it when you enable this, right, it allows you to create a messaging policy that can be assigned to students and restrict them from initiating a chat, which means that they would even though they might be able to search for a teacher or for their fellow student, they are not able to initiate a chat based on the role permission that you've assigned to them. What happens is for teachers you're able to assign them a higher role, but for students you are assigning them a basic role, which means that a teacher would be the one to initiate a chat with them before they are able to respond to that chat. So with this role-based chat permission, Microsoft was able to curb that particular issue, and then they were able to also resolve the issue about students initiating a chat to their fellow students, and then or initiating a chat to a teacher, right? All right, so that's I think that's all we have when it comes to team settings, right? So let's quickly take the team's policy before we can wrap it up, for this section. Okay, so on the team's policy, here we have again, when you talk about policies, I mentioned earlier in the class introduction that when you talk about Microsoft Teams, the first thing that should come to your mind is policies and policies and policies. Microsoft Teams has everything to do with policies, and by default, when you sign up for your Microsoft 365 subscription, all your Teams policies are always registered as global org-wide default. So for whatever policies you will be seeing in Microsoft Teams, you will see the default global org-wide default policy. But then you are able to create additional policy to assign to different group of users, to assign to individuals, depending on what you want to configure, right? And here for the Teams policy, we have just basic type of policy. Um, Create private channels, create shared channels, invite external users to shared channels, join external shared channels. So now this basically determines if an admin person wants users in the organization to create private channels. Now there's something that we also need to take note when it comes to private channels, right? Now, when a private channel is created by an owner of a particular team, right? It does not become available. Okay, I think now it becomes available, right? It becomes available in the team in the SharePoint admin center, right? For an admin to see. But previously, before now, that wasn't the case, right? But of course, with Microsoft Initiative, it became possible for that particular feature to be available, right? But then you can also restrict how users are able to create this private channel, because by the time you create a private channel, remember, like I said, the privacy of creating a private channel makes it stand alone from your normal standard or public channel that you're going to create, right? Which means that it creates its own document library aside from the original document library that the original team will have, right? So you want to restrict this, you want to also assign private channel creation to people that you would want to give such feature. Also, the same goes for shared channel as well. Shared channel, and then when you create shared channel, we've seen before that the shared channel allows you to add guest users in another organization, and with the addition of that, they would not need to switch from their own organization to your own organization to be able to communicate or collaborate with you. They will still be in their own Teams client, but then you would have configured federation and then trust relationship with that particular organization. Okay. And if you also want to restrict your own users from joining share channel, that can also be done here, right? So these are turned on by default, but you can create additional policies and restrict what you need to restrict here, and then assign such policies. So we are going to create a test one, for example. So let's call it test teams this policy. So we would restrict users from joining and then inviting users from share channel, and save this. All right, so this here we can assign to a user, right? So we can assign this to a particular user by clicking on manage users and assigning to a user, or you can also assign by bulk, which means that it allows you to select multiple users, right? You can select multiple users, and you can also assign by group policy as well. Can also assign by group policy assignment. So what the difference between assigning individually and assigning by group policy is that you would need to create a group particular to a some group of users, right? So if I need to do a group assignment, I would have created a group. Say for example, I want to assign this policy to some users in the marketing department, right? And then I already have a marketing group already existing. So I can come over here and then add, click on add and search for that group name. Bear in mind that the group that you're creating has to be a security group as well. So when you create a security group, then you select the policy you want to assign to them. By then, of course, you would have created the policy that you want to assign, and then click on apply. So let's see if we can practice that quickly. So I'll go back here, create a group, which is going to be a security group. So I'm going to call that group marketing. You can leave the description. It is not mandatory, as already mentioned earlier. I'm not going to do any role-based assignment. Click on next, and then the group is created. All right, so you can click on close here, and then assign users to that particular group. So go to members. So here I have Megan. You can search for Megan here. Okay, I also have Alan. Okay, so I'm just going to add this two just for a test. Okay, so I've added these two just for test, right? But before we proceed to assign a policy to them, let's quickly check to see what policy that Alan and Megan has by default, right? So to check that, you should navigate to users, and under users, let's look for Alan here. Okay, and go to policies, and under policy, we look at Teams policy. Now, team policy, you can see by default, he has the global policy assigned, and that is the same thing that Megan is going to have as well, right? So to assign the group policy, like I said, come over here, click on the add button, then search for the group that we already created, which is marketing. You can add that and then select the policy you want to assign to them, which is the team's test policy. Leave it you can leave it at rank one, depending on if you have multiple policy that's already configured that does the same thing. You can change the ranking of that particular policy. So now we've created this and then we've assigned that policy to those users. Now if we go back again to manage users and go to Alan, right? So let's click on view policies. You can see under teams policy that should have changed. So you can see now this user has a policy assigned to the group policy assignment, right? And then I think that will bring us to the end of the class for today, and we will now take questions. Uh,
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Guys, do we have questions for Chidi, or we want him to take another 20 minutes? Do you have questions for him? If you wanted to take another 20 minutes, you can just use a thumbs up, raise your hand if you wanted to take another 20 minutes, or we can just go into question and answer. All right, so I think it's question and answer then. All right, guys. If you have any question for Chidi, you can raise your hands and I can, ask you to ask your question. Or if you have a question, if you don't want to raise your hand, you can drop the question in the chat as well. Do we have any questions, guys? Do you have any question?
All right, thank you. I do. Thank you so much, Chidi. An amazing session, very informative. Thank you.
thank you.
Um, I just want to ask a very quick one on the shared teams.
Okay.
Can we add a guest to teams if you have any member of your, if you have a guest in your Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, can you add them to shared teams?
No, you cannot. So, like I already mentioned, before you can add a guest user to a shared channel, you would have configured what is called a cross synchronization in your Azure AD, right? So there would have been a
Okay.
trust relationship between your organization and that organization, and they would have configured a a trust relationship, which is called cross synchronization, and you would also configure the same thing with your own domain and then your own domain. That configuration needs to be done before that can be done. So ordinarily, your guest would also work as your business to business communication in Microsoft Teams. But in order to implement that shared channel communication, there has to be a cross synchronization configured for both parties.
All right. Thank you so much for that clarification. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you, MJ. All right. So I have a couple of questions, Chidi, since nobody's asking question. So let me
Go
shoot.
ahead.
All right. So the first one now, as an SME, what do you advise a Teams administrator to where should they create a Teams for? Do you advise them to create the Teams from the Teams admin center or to create from the Teams client application itself? What's your take on
Uh,
that?
as an SME, I would say create have a script, right, to automate your processes, right? Have a
Okay.
script to automate your processes. It gives you a quick hands-on to because now if you're creating from Teams client, right, it's a different ballgame altogether because now in the Teams client there is of a different feature that you can use when creating the team, which gives you the feature to create a global org-wide team, and the global org-wide team can only be created by a global administrator. Now, that's the only feature that you have different from creating team in any other team that you can create. Remember, again, you can create a team from Teams client, you can create from the admin center, you can use a PowerShell to create a team. You can also create from when creating a group, you can also create a team. When creating a SharePoint group, you can also create a team as well, right? But in order to depend on the type of team that you want to create, that would depend on the platform that you want to use. So if you're creating an org team, the only preference or the only feature to use is the Teams client. right? But if you're creating any other type of group, any other type of team, private or public, I would advise that you have a script, because the script helps you to automate your processes, especially when you're creating a quite a number type of teams. But if you're creating just a single team, you can use the Teams client. For me, I think I'll prefer to use the Teams client. But in a situation whereby you're running an organization that creates a team frequently and a bulk of it, get a PowerShell, automate the process. It becomes easier for you, to input the name and the description in your CSV file, and then you can quickly create them.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much for that. So the second question, is it possible, is there any policy that Teams administrator can use to actually stop users from creating teams from their Teams client application? Is there any policy
Yes,
like that?
yes, yes. There's a policy that you can use. Basically, it's an Azure policy.
Okay.
I don't think I have that. There's a PowerShell that you need to run, right? Maybe we would probably run that on our next class so that we see how that policy functions. So is a script that you need to run to prevent users from creating a group, right? Which means that you can restrict group creation to a certain number of users, right? Again, for you to do that, you need to have a security group, add the selected users to that security group, run the PowerShell, and then only those selected users in that security group will be able to create a group. And subsequently, if you want you other users to start creating group, all you need to do is add that user to that particular group, and then they automatically start creating a group, right? And if you also need to disable that, you also need to run the script again, disable the feature, and then people will start creating group as well. But that, yes, definitely you can prevent users from creating a group in Office 365.
Thank you so much for that. That's I was thinking maybe as an admin, I don't want users at all to be able to create group at all. Let me be the one. Let them come to me to if they want to create any group. Let me create it for them so that they don't actually spoil the architecture of the organization. That's actually
Yeah,
why
sure.
that question pops up. All right,
Yeah,
the
it's
third question. Yeah. The third question. So during the demo, after you created the test team, the M365 team, I noticed that there was a settings when we talk about the adding a group, the channel, and there was settings. Then
yeah.
the next thing we talked about, the next under the tab, under that teams tab is also team settings. What is the difference between the two settings? Team settings for the teams that we created, then the teams
Mhm.
settings tab. If you can go back to the admin center where you're sharing. All right, so the team set after managing the team settings, yeah, in that team, if you click on the teams,
Okay.
so there is a
And
settings here.
this.
Yes,
Mhm.
and that settings here. So can you elaborate on the two? Can you elaborate on the
Okay,
two?
so this particular team settings here, right, speaks to only this particular teams group here. It speaks to only this particular teams group here, right? So whatever settings that you change or implement here only affects this particular group, teams group, M365 teams. So it is
Okay.
particular, this settings here is particular to this group. But while these settings here, right, affect not just the team, but also other functions that you have in the Teams application itself, right? Now, recall that I said that you can add additional cloud storages to your channels and your teams, right? So if this is turned off, if these settings that you apply the settings here, it means that you are not able to do that, right? Again, we also saw that you were able to fetch email addresses from your Teams channel. So when you turn this off as well, it affects all the channels that you're going to be creating within your Microsoft 365. So you can call this general application, or this generally affects every team that you create, while the other one that we saw earlier specifically affects each team that you create.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much. Two more questions. I think there is one I'm going to skip until we get to guest access, maybe in our next class, because I wanted to understand something between it's similar to the question that MJ asked about the shared channel. But when we get to the guest access, I'll be able to ask that so that it's clear for
Okay.
everybody. All right. So the next one I'm going to ask so I noticed that even as an administrator, when you created these M365 teams, right? You didn't add
Yeah.
yourself there. By the time you
Yeah.
went to your admin center, that's the next tab after this tab that we're currently on, the Teams is not there. So it's
Yeah.
possible. So the question there is now, as an administrator, if I don't add myself, even though I'm the one that created it from the Teams Admin Center, and I didn't add myself as a member or the owner of the teams, I won't still see it here. Is that correct?
Yes, just very correct. Very correct. So once you try to create it, by default, it's going to choose your name, right? But of course, because as an admin, you don't want to be a member or owner of every team that's in your organization, because you cannot be in the IT department and be in marketing at the same time, be in sales, be in business development, which means that whatever activity happens there, you would get notification and all of that, and it can be mind blowing, right? So you want to
Mhm.
restrict that to people of that particular department or unit. But if for any reason an issue comes up and you need to troubleshoot, you can always add yourself as a member for the troubleshooting.
All right. Thank you so much. The last question for me. Yeah. So you talk about a scenario whereby if you have just one user that is the owner of the team, then the user is not on license or possibly deleted from the tenant. I think you
Yeah,
talk about a scenario like that. So
yeah,
is there a scenario in which an unlicensed user or a deleted user from the Microsoft Entra ID, that's the tenant itself, you search
yeah.
using the search bar? Is there a scenario that you can still see the user there? Maybe you search is an internal user,
Now,
but the user has been
when you
unlicensed.
yeah, when you search a user in Microsoft Teams, right, there are different things that happens, right? Now, understandably, when you unlicense the user is no longer available in GAL, right, which is a global address list.
Address
But the
list.
user is also available on your Active Directory, which means
Okay.
your Teams is taking users people search from your Azure Active Directory. So even though the users are no longer available in your global address list, but they are available on the Azure Active Directory. So it pulls those users from their Azure, it pulls those users from their Azure Active Directory, but unlicensed, right? But they
Okay.
are still there because they are still part of the Azure AD Active Directory identity, but no longer available on the GA side of things.
All right. Thank you. MJ can go for it. Can go for it. MJ has a
Yeah, so
question.
I just have it's a very interesting session, I mean, to be honest.
Very interesting,
And
actually.
yeah, very interesting. I just want you to please throw a bit of more information or light on when you have for for a shared channel, especially probably maybe you delete a shared channel, what happens to it? And what happens if you delete a team that a shared channel is? I just want to see what the behavior is all about when you um, delete a shared channel or even the team's channel that has a shared channel. And lastly, what is it like if probably you archive the channel? What do you get? What's the behavior like?
Yeah, when you archive a channel, basically what it does is, the channels are not deleted or the teams are not deleted. So you are only archiving them, say for example, to stop communication or to stop collaboration, which means that it is no longer available for users on their Teams client to communicate, right? But when you delete a team, right, all the features in that particular team, both the channels and the share channel are deleted, but they are available for 30 days, depending on the kind of policies that you have, right? By default, Microsoft has given all administrators 30 days, right, to retain their groups, because again, uh, the shared channel, the standard channel, the private channel are an offshoot of the original channel, which is the Teams group now, right? So
Okay.
when you delete the Teams group, you have 30 days default policy or retention to either get it back or not get it back, right? But if you have set probably a further retention policy for your groups, then that will stay even after you've deleted them. But when you do not have such retention policy, after 30 days, the group, the channel, and the share channel all get pushed away from your groups, your group. So the moment that retention 30 days retention for the group itself exceeds and gets deleted or pushed from your tenant, so will the shared channel and the other type of channels, right? Well, now that is the in the group type of things, right? In the group side of things. Now, this is also different from what you have on your SharePoint side of things, because now your SharePoint, holds your files for that collaboration. So the default retention policy for SharePoint differs from the retention policy that you have for your groups. While the groups are for 30 days, SharePoint has about 93 days, right? So even
Okay.
when your groups must have deleted based on a 30-day default policy, your files are still there on your secondary level of deletion on SharePoint side of things until about 93 days.
All right. Thank you so much. So in terms of if you have some sort of sharing, individual or team sharing, what's the behavior going to be like once the channel is restored? Do I lose it or do I still have it?
So when you restore the channel, right, and then uh, in most cases when you restore the channel, right, now if you restore the group, it means that the members of that group are still part of that group, right? Which means they still have the look and feel as what they had before, right?
Yeah.
But the moment the group get purged away, right, you cannot restore anymore, right? And but if you now restore the SharePoint document library after the 30-day span, which of course means that the group may have gone, right? The people who were the original members of that particular group no longer exist because what you've only done is to restore the SharePoint document library, but not the group itself.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Chidi. Emmanuel, I think over to you.
All right, thank you very much,
Thanks.
MJ, for that question. Guys, if you have any questions, you can go for it. All right, Emmanuel, you have a question. Go for it, please. You can unmute yourself and ask a question, Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, presenter. It's a wonderful. Though I joined very late, but I'll be able to gain a lot of things in this short period of time. I just want to
Awesome.
ask a question. Is it possible to, if we are looking at the alternative, not restoration via the interface now, like if you want to do a what do we call this command line, you know, to
Using
do the
PowerShell?
restoration. Yes, using PowerShell. Thank you so much to do restoration because in my experience, I know that sometimes when we want to restore a particular user or group, I'm not talking about Microsoft Teams now. If it is not actually possible directly from the tenant, there are some PowerShell commands that can actually like force restore a particular user or a group, or policy or something like that. Is it also possible to use PowerShell to do restoration, or even when it passed the normal duration of 30 days deletion period?
Yeah, so once that 30-day deletion period exceeds, it is very difficult for you to restore from your own from because now that would delete both the GUID of that particular group or even the user, right? Now, in some cases, if it is still available on the Microsoft side of things, which in most cases is not possible, right? The only one I'm sure of is SharePoint. So even after the your SharePoint files has deleted after 93 days and you did not restore them, you still have about 7 days, I think about 7 days to do what is called point in time restore with Microsoft, right? But for Teams, for the 30 days duration, once it gets purged, you can't restore them again, either with PowerShell or with anything at all. Once that 30 days has elapsed. Uh,
Awesome. Thank you very much. Emmanuel, does that answer your question?
Yes, that does answer my questions. Thank you so.
Uh,
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. MJ, you have the floor.
Okay. Yes, I do have another question for Chidi.
go
Chidi,
ahead.
is there any limit to how many shared channels you can actually create per team? And in terms of owners also, is there any limitation to that?
Yes, I think there's a limit to owners. Let me quickly confirm that. Give me a moment. Give me a
Okay.
moment. Okay. So here it is, right?
Okay,
So these are teams and
beautiful.
channels, right?
All right.
So this gives you a list of limits what you can create when it comes to a number of teams that you can create. Number of owners per team can only be 100.
Okay.
So these are limits to for now when it comes to shared channel. I think let me see quickly. So for limits in shared channel, you can only have 200 channels per team.
Okay. As against the others that have
I say
250, right?
exactly.
All right. Okay. All right. Then in terms of team's owner, do you have any limitation to that
Yeah,
also?
teams owner 100 can only have
Okay.
100.
All right then. But for that's for general team. Can we see the one for shared channel?
So shared
How
channel
many
comes
owners?
under shared channels comes under a
It's
team,
under the teams
right?
itself.
Under the team itself, right? So this is like
Mm,
the parent team. So shared channel or private channel or public channel comes under this team. So when you create a
yeah.
user, an owner can only have owners of a particular team. You cannot have owners of a shared channel. It's only owners of the team that can create either a shared channel, a private channel, or a public channel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I missed my question there. Sorry.
That's
I think
fine.
I missed my question. My
Yeah.
question really was to be, yes, I think I missed my question. I think my question really is that can a regular team member can a regular team member create a shared channel, or it's just an owner that can create it?
An owner is an owner that can create it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in private channels, can
Yeah,
a
in private
regular
channels, yes,
can
a
a
regular owner
regular
can
team
create
member?
it. Yes, they
Okay.
can if you've
All right.
allowed
I
it.
think I missed it. Yeah. That's just what I wanted to actually bring out for the audience also.
All right then.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chidi. This has been so amazing session. So let me ask my own final question also. So I noticed that in the team settings, when we wanted to assign the team's policy that we created, by default, all the users, because you search for the users, we saw that by default that it's the global hub policies that was actually assigned for each of
Yeah.
those policies, be it messaging policies or the Teams policy itself. So in a situation whereby I created a policies, is there a way that I can indirectly use the global hub policy to actually override the policies that I created?
So policies has precedences, right? Now, when you assign it by default, users have the global org policy. But when you create policy and assign it individually, specifically to users, right? It overrides the global policy, right? Now, a user cannot have two types of policy. User can only have one policy assigned to them. So you can either have a group policy, or you can either have a group policy, a specific policy, and you can or the global org policy. So is it that the user has the global org policy or has the specific policy or have the group policy? Now, the user specific assigned policy overrides any other policy that's assigned to them, right? Which of course means that even if a user has an individual policy assigned to them, I can always also override it with the global policy, which means it takes the user back to the global policy that is already existing, right? I can also override it with the group policy, which means that the user will no longer have the individual policy, but now the group policy overrides it. So it all boils down to what you've configured in each of those policy, and then what you want the users to have available as features in their Teams client. I think you're speaking on mute. I think you're speaking on mute, Emmanuel.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you so much for for the answers. Guys, if you have any questions, we still have about a few more minutes before we round up the session. This has actually been a great session. Do I have a witness? Do you have anybody that agree with me that this has been a great session so far? Can I see a thumbs up or something, a heart, a reaction, use a reaction? This has been a great session for me because I've learned a lot in this session. All right. So thank you so much everyone for joining. So in the absence of no other questions, we'll be running up to this session. Next week again, same time, Chidi will be available. We're going to continue from where we stopped today. As you can see,
Thank you.
we have so much to cover in the Microsoft Teams, and our plan is to actually go through each of go through each of those tabs one after the other so that you can actually understand the Microsoft Teams. You'll be able to administer the Microsoft Teams very well. So thank you everyone for joining today, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.
Thank you
Yeah,
too.
Okay, thank
Thank you
you.
very
bye.
much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everyone.
We
thank you.
appreciate.
Bye.
Thank you very
I
much.
mean,
Thank you.
good evening. Thank you.
One. Bye, Emmanuel.